So now that you have more of an introduction to the CEF, I want to talk to you about how I put together the goals and outcomes. I looked at the CEF, especially the can-do statements that are put into language that is what the students will be able to do versus how they are limited, which is a nice focus. Um, I also I looked at those can-do statements, but I realized that we needed something a little more specific, and so that's why I looked at the world-class instructional design and assessment framework that has recently been put together in the United States, and also the Arizona English Language Proficiency Standards to give me more specific language. Um, I also was interested in the evidence for learning. How are we going to know what the students are understanding? Because understanding by itself is not something that's very observable. So that's what we're going to look at next. When we look at goals for language learning, we want to look at differentiating how do we know when a student has moved from one level to another. And in order to differentiate those levels, we look at the amount of language that's processed in terms of the word level, sentence, paragraph, and paragraph level. What is the complexity of the discourse? Is it simple grammar? Are the clauses more complex? What about the tenses? That sort of thing. And what is the expected level of vocabulary use? Are they going to be using more social language, more academic language? And what about their expanded literacy levels? How much will they be able to apply reading comprehension strategies on their own? How much scaffolding do students need on the part of the teacher in each lesson for them to be able to understand what is going on linguistically? And so these are some ideas for example, if you look at level 1 being an A1.1 and a level 2 being, for example, a 2.1 level. These would be the expectations that you would look at, for example, so that in one level they're producing words, in the next level they're producing phrases. Okay, so that's how you can start to distinguish the proficiency levels. When it comes to seeing evidence for student learning, we want to, and also for teaching and scaffolding, supporting student learning, we want to look at three inputs, if you will. One would be sensory, another would be interaction, and the other one would be graphic. So how will students be able to show us their understanding? It would be through things like drawing, providing audio, writing diagrams, showing pictures, matching pictures. And again, for teaching, we want to be able to use these things to help students understand. For interaction with the language, because we want our students to actually use the language, we can put them into different grouping configurations, and at times also even use native language, have the students use it, not the teacher, but have the students use it in order to confirm their understanding of what's going on in the target language. And we can also have them produce and also show them things like graphic organizers, tables, and charts for them to also access the information in the target language. So this could be an example of the listening skill and how a goal looks and what the outcomes look at different proficiency levels. So the goal could be that the student will be able to recognize and understand the words for people around them. And we can see that they understand this. First, the student would have some teacher modeling, some have interaction within the context of familiar stories, dialogues, or songs, and then they would show their understanding by doing things like pointing to pictures after slow, clear enunciation on the part of the speaker who speaks directly to them. That would be at the level of a pre-A1. A student at the higher level would be able to do the same, but would not necessarily need the speaker to speak directly to them. And they could still point to pictures to show their understanding. At an A1.1, they can again point to pictures, but the speaker would actually be speaking more at a normal speed. At an A 1.2 level, so for example in fourth grade, the goal shifts a bit so that the goal becomes can understand some words and expressions when others are talking about them, their family, or their classroom, provided the speech is clear and slow. And the student can show understanding in pairs, small group work, and finally independently by matching pictures, writing words, completing a graphic organizer or a sentence frame, drawing, or acting upon the information. In fifth grade, when the level comes up to an 8.82.1, again, the goal shifts a bit. The expectations are a bit higher. The student should be able to understand phrases and high frequency vocabulary related to areas of personal interest. And they can show their understanding by selecting words from drawings, or matching words to drawings, and using words or phrase banks to be able to label drawings. And then in sixth grade, the students should be able to understand a presentation on a topic when the subject is familiar to them and it is delivered slowly and clearly. And they can show their understanding by taking notes within a graphic organizer. Again, this would be within the listening skill. So this is an example of how I've aligned some of the goals and the outcomes per grade level, and for each of the CEF levels for Ciclos 1 and 2. So what I've done is I've identified goals based on the CEF, and informed by WIDA and the Arizona standards, which are pretty specific, and turned those into goals and outcomes. So the goal would be what we want our students to come out with, and this is how they can show their understanding. I've done this for for all the levels with listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So you'll see that in, let's say, for example, fourth grade, and this would be for speaking and speaking, interaction, and production. A goal could be can interact in a simple way, provided others are prepared to repeat, rephrase, and speak slowly. Can show understanding by answering yes or no or selecting answers from a list of choices. Now, this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about with the goals and outcomes. And then when we design the units, as we're starting to, and we'll be using some of these. And so, for example, the second unit for grade 4, this is one of the goals and outcomes. For the fourth unit, this is also one of the goals and outcomes that will be used. I have done this for, and I'll show you, from first through third grade, in terms of the goals and outcomes. So all of the ones down here in these purple tabs are for first through third grade. And then for fourth grade, I also have them for listening, speaking, reading, and writing. For each grade, I've also created what I call language forms, focusing more on the grammar. And they can share, the grade clusters can share grammar points that will be taught, because just as a child that is learning his or her first language, they're not presented with language in a lockstep sequence. They're presented with all of the language, and what they do is they get from it what they're ready to understand and then produce. So it's the same thing with the language forms. However, there are certain language forms that there are more ready to integrate, and those are the ones that we will emphasize in certain grade clusters. So for example, fourth and fifth grade, the language form outcomes can be like this. So we look at things like pronouns, adjectives, interjections, sentence structure, and that sort of thing. And so these are the things that we can see being modeled in the materials that are used and in the way that the teachers emphasize language at those grade levels. In fourth grade, then, all of those are in the yellow tabs for the various skills. And then in, let me see here, in fifth grade, Then we get more goals and outcomes for listening, speaking, reading, writing. And then in sixth grade, we get the same thing for all those four language skills plus the language forms. Now, I've decided to create a cluster for sixth and then seventh grade, which is going into tercer ciclo, so that there's a bridge between the two ciclos, so that the kids are the teachers and the kids that are then taking on at the progression of language development in seventh grade have that sort of transition period where they can use some of the things that they were presented with in sixth grade and move them on in to seventh grade. So now that you're familiar with the goals and outcomes and how they're being integrated into the curriculum, something else I wanted to share with you is that I wanted to also integrate a way to raise thinking levels in the English curriculum. I noticed that much of the teaching was based around teaching discrete language skills, and there wasn't much meaning being put into place as they were discussing language and using language. And one way to raise thinking levels and meaning is by starting off a unit with things like essential questions that have these kinds of characteristics. Of course, such questions then produce what's called enduring understandings. And these are, both of these ideas are promoted by the creators of this idea, which are Grant Wiggins and Jay McTee. And enduring understandings are specific inferences based on big ideas. They help students transfer their understanding to new situations. They are essential for connected individual understanding, and they're usually listed as full sentences. Here are examples of essential questions and their ensuing enduring understandings. As students are engaging in higher level thinking, they also need to be supported in how they express that understanding. One way to do that is through something called sentence frames. So we were able to match language functions that deal with the higher level thinking and how they express that through language, and through a sentence frame that scaffolds them and to be able to produce language in a heavily patterned way. And these heavy patterns can be shown in materials as well to provide modeling that then they end up approximating and internalizing for their own use. So we ended up creating a template for each unit based on what we know of the CEF, the language functions, the sentence frames, and what we did is we asked the asesores then to look at the programas de estudios in things like math, science, social studies, art, and then pull themes from that on which to build units. We would also like to emphasize something called phonemic awareness, and I've written those into the reading section, the reading skills section of the goals and outcomes. And I would like to also see that the units end with an art-based project so that the students are using multimodal sensory inputs to show their understanding and as another way to intake the language and make it stick a little better. So at this point, the asesores have written the first draft of several units, and I'm in the process of editing them. And then we will go ahead and I will write some more units and then present them to the asesores for a final draft to be drawn up. And then after that, start to train some teachers on how to use the units for lesson planning. Thank you for listening to these two parts of the presentation, and I will remain available through Skype to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.